I invite Antonia Joy Wilson, our moderator, to present our super special and honor guest, Diane Wittry. It's an honor for us to have you here, dear. Then I ask to Antonia to introduce you to the audience.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Diane Wittry. Diane and I actually go back to USC where we worked together, and she was playing violin, and I was also conducting for the first time in that, with a master's degree. It was so much fun. But anyway, Diane has come a long way. She recently was named as one of the top 30 professional musicians by Musical America, which is a huge honor. She's now the music director of the Allentown Symphony in Pennsylvania, as well as the Garden State Philharmonic in New Jersey. And in addition to all that, Diane is a major pedagogue with 2 books. One is Beyond the Baton, and the other one is Baton Basics. And it's been really fun for me to kind of go back over that and hear the kinds of ways in which you've been working on that to help so many other young conductors around the world. And also, in addition to that, she's taught courses and workshops all over the world, regular conducting workshops with her book, as well as many others. And another thing that really kind of amazed me too, Diane, is how much of a composer you've become. I went and listened to your Mist performance. That's beautiful. It's so kind of impressionistic and kind of, it's a lovely combination. Kind of, I'd almost call it neo-impressionistic. I'm making up a term, but but it's beautiful. And so, I think maybe that will be a fun thing to talk to everybody about too, is your abilities as a composer in addition to being a conductor. So, anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Diane Wittry, and take it away, Diane.
Great, thank you, Antonia. And I want to thank Lydia Amato for coordinating this wonderful symposium, and Antonia Jo Wilson for moderating and organizing things, and Andrea Botello for being in touch with me over all these years and contacting me also about this wonderful opportunity. So it gives me great joy to see so many women participating and sharing ideas across the world. And I'm inspired by all of you, and we share so many mutual goals and dreams. So as Antonia mentioned, I'm currently the music director of the Allentown Symphony in Pennsylvania, which is a professional regional per service orchestra in the United States. It has a budget of about $3.5 million. And I've guest conducted professional orchestras in about 11 different countries. But I'm passionate about the role of the regional per service orchestra in the United States and the role that those orchestras play in bringing music to their region. So today, I'm going to talk with you about my book, Beyond the Baton. Looks like this. And it was published by Oxford University Press in 2007. And it focuses on artistic leadership and the job of the conductor and music director off the podium in the United States with regional per service orchestras. So when I graduated from music conservatory as a conductor and I achieved my first music director position, I realized that the field was changing greatly, and the dictator type of leadership that had been so successful earlier on was not the norm anymore. And conductors were expected to serve in multiple roles in the community and to be an artistic leader. And as I sat through board meetings and I looked at budgets and I talked about long-range planning and strategy, I realized that I did not have the training necessary to become successful in these areas. In the United States at that time, conductors were very well trained in conducting technique, in music analysis. We were somewhat well trained in programming classical concerts, but in general, not trained at all in the business aspects of the job, and not trained very well in programming other types of concerts like family concerts, educational concerts, and pops concerts. I also discovered that I did not really have the training to truly be an arts leader. That training requires the ability to communicate artistic vision to a diverse group of people, and the ability to work successfully with people of all different types and backgrounds. So as I struggled with these things in my first few jobs, I began to read a lot of business management books and leadership books, and to apply this knowledge to my work with the board and with the orchestra. And as time went on, I realized that there was a great need in the field to demystify and to clarify the job of the conductor, and to give the conductor more knowledge and tools for them to successfully navigate their duties as an artistic leader off the podium. I also realized that everyone's path to the podium is different, and it often feels like a very lonely road with no one to help you along the way. That's why this conference is so great. And through my book, Beyond the Baton, I wanted to help young conductors understand the process of how orchestras work in the United States, how job searches are handled with regional orchestras, and how to be successful at the interview process. And then once you have the job, in the book, I wanted to help people work with different types of people, work with difficult people, and understanding the programming process, the fundraising, the marketing, all the different roles that come into being a music director that were so rarely talked about in school. Lastly, the resource section of the book, I wanted to create a section that puts all the list of information that I use regularly for programming and research in one place. And so I created the resource section with lots of reference information that I could have at my fingertips at the back of the book. During this talk, I want to take you quickly through some of the topics in the book. And then during the last 15 minutes, we can open it up to questions. And through the chat, Antonia Joy Wilson will help moderate that. I'm now going to share my screen with you as we talk about chapters in my book, Beyond the Baton. I need to be enabled to share screen. Is that possible? Thank you.
Good.
Whoops. We're not in the right place in the PowerPoint. Let me just stop one more time and get you there. Okay. Hopefully this will work now. Technology is not my strong point. Here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Great. So in the book, I start with addressing first some of the needs of training, the personal attributes needed to be a conductor, knowledge of harmony, repertoire conducting. We just kind of go through some of these, the character, integrity. But I also talk about categories much less discussed, which really talks about the advantages of different types of conducting that you might want to be involved with. So things like, what are the different types of conducting jobs? You know, when I was in school, people talked about, conducting the New York Philharmonic, conducting a top professional orchestra, but there are so many different types of conducting jobs that you can train yourself for. And the training really varies depending on the type of orchestra or ensemble that you want to work with. So types of ensembles, we have volunteer orchestras. If you really enjoy working with people, rehearsing over a long period of time, teaching and helping people, this is an ideal position for you. Per service orchestras often have a mix of abilities in the United States. Most of them are paid and they rehearse usually in a shorter time period with maybe 3 to 4 rehearsals or maybe up to 5 or 6 per concert. Fully professional orchestras are every single week. They are usually unionized. There's a lot of things you need to know about the union to work with them. Choruses, wind ensembles, and bands. We also have opera orchestras, ballet orchestras, new music ensembles, youth orchestras, community orchestras, forming your own orchestra. A lot of people do that. The path for that takes different knowledge. So you want to be thinking of that as you're getting your training. High school, college orchestras, choruses of all levels, church music positions, community band, wind ensemble. Each of these need well-trained conductors, well-trained artistic leaders to enhance the music throughout all of our countries. And so my goal is always to increase the training so that everyone is successful at the highest level. So the type of orchestra ensemble you work with defines your training, your path, and informs your decisions and where you want to spend your time. As I was starting out, no one talked to me about these decisions and choices. And so I spent a section of the book really going through this very carefully. Now, everybody wants to get your first job. And so in the book, I talk about applying for jobs. How do you become known in the field? How do you prepare a resume, a biography, a cover letter? The importance of good press photos. I cannot stress that enough, particularly if you want to work with a regional orchestra in the United States, because they're going to put your picture on the brochures and in the marketing. So having those photos is very important. Conducting videos. Everyone now is requiring a conducting video in the audition process. How do you go about making that video? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? How do you put your best foot forward? And of course, references. Who should you put on for references? How that should be dealt with. If you're lucky enough in the process to get to the next round of a search, how do you prepare for the interview? Most of the time there's a first phone interview. I suspect now it's going now to be a Zoom interview. You will only be invited for a live interview if you're in the final steps of the process. In my book, I list some of the most asked interview questions. Excuse me. And I have to say that many orchestras and search committees across the United States are using the questions in my book. So it's a really good reference point if you're preparing for an interview. When I first started out, I didn't even realize that I needed to prepare for an interview and that perhaps there were questions I should research and prepare answers for. So if you make it to a regional orchestra audition in the United States, this is going to be almost a week-long experience for you. And you feel like you're being put through your paces. You will do community talks. You will usually have a meeting with the orchestra committee. You're going to have a meeting with the volunteer guild. You'll meet with the board, obviously, and the search committee. You'll be involved in press, radio, and sometimes TV interviews. You'll be expected usually to do a pre-concert talk. And of course, at the end of all that, you still have to be on your game for the rehearsals and the concert. You know, by the time you finish all that, you're so tired you can barely stand up anymore. So the other thing that once you get the job is you need to prepare and be knowledgeable about contracts. So you're starting out and you probably have never seen a conductor's contract for a regional orchestra. Not something that was shared with me when I was in school. And yet when somebody offers you a job, you're supposed to know about contracts and you're supposed to be able to negotiate without creating issues with your future employer. And so I put into the book a section that talks about some of the basic contract terms and sections and things that you want to negotiate. The force majeure clause, I have to say, during COVID has come into play with a lot of conductors. And so I think going forward, there's going to be additional language put in there because some conductors were completely cut off with no income, even though they had done the work for the season and prepared. And so you want to have language in that contract that protects you from those things. Some of the things that you can negotiate that you don't always think about, and I'm talking about regional orchestras here, where maybe you live in the community or maybe you're traveling in. But just keep in mind, it's not just about the salary. There's a lot of other things that can be talked about. And often the salary is very fixed, but some of these other things come out of different budget items. And so they might have, for example, a personal development fund that will allow you to have funds to go to a conference. I have that in my contract, and it's been just wonderful because I've been able to attend conferences all throughout my career and have my orchestra support that. Score purchase stipend. I don't have that in my contract, but I kind of wish I would as the price of scores keep going up. Whether you have fees for additional concerts, that's very good to put that in and define those fees ahead of time so that as the orchestra is thinking about expanding, they know exactly what it's going to cost and it doesn't create a rift between you and your employer. So just some things to think about. So one of the important sections of the book is my section on first year do's and don'ts. And I have to say that I learned a lot of this by trial and error. So with a regional per service orchestra in the United States, it's very important to build your relationships very quickly and upfront in your first year. You want to spend time, if possible, with every single board member. You want to really get to know the orchestra, the staff, and you really want to make what I call your hit list to meet with the different leaders in the community so that when you have problems later on, you can pick up a phone or send an email. They know who you are. You have a relationship. In your first season, you want to spend some time assessing your audience. This is very important for programming for future seasons. Where are their listening ears and where do you want to take them? It is important not to re-audition the orchestra. The people that are tenured in your orchestra, they need a comfort level in that first year that their jobs are secure. And you can then address issues over time. But your job the first year is to get everyone on your team playing at the highest level that they personally can. You want to prioritize your time. This is essential because you're going to have so many things coming at you in your first year and your second year and your third year, and time is of the essence. And you want to establish your leadership role on the team. Organizational skills are very important to develop, and another thing that we don't have a lot of training in. So you want to be able to quickly identify urgent versus important. So often we get bogged down in the little things, the email that comes in that drags you in a whole different direction when you should be working on the program for next season, or you should be working on your bowings or learning your score. Really set your boundaries. And I get trapped like all of us, you get trapped in the email trails, but try to box your time where this is your score study time where you're not going to be on the computer. And then later in the day when your mind, and when your mind is not so fresh, then dive into those emails and crank through. Because otherwise, if you sit down and start with emails the first thing of the day, it will take your entire day. Proper tools and training and workspace, make sure you have the right programs and that you get the training to organize your emails so that you're not drowning trying to sort them and find things. And then delegating and scheduling. Even when I was younger, I hired someone to do work for me at minimum wage. I usually hired a student, usually somebody interested in conducting, and they were happy to help. They were happy for the training. And they could do things like log my scores, file things. I even dictated letters early on. Try to figure out everything you can delegate so that you have time for the most important parts of your job. And don't be afraid to say no. I remember one time I got asked by a board member to go on a donor call, and the person was a very big donor, but they lived an hour away. And we had a concert the next week. And I had not planned to give up a full day in my schedule to go do a donor call. And so, I had to say, I can't do the call that day. I'm happy to do it later on at some point, but I've scheduled my time and I need to prepare for the concert. And they need to understand that. So these are just some things to keep you thinking about that. The next chapter of the book focuses on everything that we do becoming an artistic leader. And what is it like to be an artistic leader in a community? So here are some key components to remember about leadership. Leaders lead by example. They are passionate, persuasive, and inspirational. So often we forget that. Our job is to inspire. Leaders have to be committed to the overall vision, and most importantly, we have to stay focused because everybody else is probably going to be unfocused. And so many great ideas are going to be coming out. It's our job to cull through those ideas, focus the group, point the way and say, march forward, and then to be there to support. Leaders have an innate knack, and if you don't know how to do this, you have to learn how to do this, to put the right people in the right positions. And whether that's in the orchestra, the right musicians on the right part, or whether that's with the board, committees, everybody you work with, it's making sure you analyze. You don't just plop someone in a job. You call someone up and you ask them to help with a certain project, but if they don't have that skill set, they will not be successful. They're going to get discouraged and they're going to not become involved anymore. They'll avoid you for the rest of your life. So it's very, very important to assess people's skill sets before inviting them to participate. Leaders care about the people they work with. They absolutely must care. It makes a huge difference in your success with your orchestra. And then leaders embrace change. This is so critical. I always say, if you're not going up, you're going down. Things are always changing, and you are a change agent in your organization. The book talks about the process of change, how to get people on the same page with change, how to find that one unifying goal that allows the change to begin to happen. So something to think about. To become a leader, you need two things. You need knowledge of what followers want. People will only do something if something is in it for them. That's just a fact of life. And so what do they want? What is in it for them? And you need to create that spirit of excitement and commitment that energizes people. What your orchestra needs. People need security. Your orchestra members, particularly in your first few years, need to know that their jobs are secure. This is important. People need to be appreciated, thanked, and rewarded. And board people are different with this than orchestra members, but always remember, so often we forget to thank the orchestra. We stop and immediately we start criticizing, right? Correcting, improving. It's good to just stop and say, I love the way that our principal oboe played that solo. Wasn't that beautiful? You know? And then suddenly the orchestra comes together as a team and they know that you support them and that you're not just pushing them to make them better, but you're appreciating what they do. People need to be able to control their future. When they start getting irritated, it's when their future is insecure in their mind. So keep that in mind. They do need to be held accountable for their actions. So when a problem happens, most of us don't like confrontation, but you must address problems as they happen. And they need to be a part of something larger than themselves. And that's what you're trying to create through your vision of the orchestra. So if you can meet the needs of your orchestra members, inspire them towards artistic and musical goals, you will always be successful. Artistic vision. As a music director, it is our job to establish the artistic vision for the orchestra. And once the vision is set, to communicate that vision to your board, your funders, and the greater community. Programming is at the heart of artistic vision of an orchestra. The repertoire you choose should reflect your enthusiasm for the artistic mission and should enhance your overall community. I suggest that you create a philosophy of programming and growth. There are many ways to grow an orchestra, and it's not just by increasing your budget and doing more concerts and hiring more players, but it's also about expanding the repertoire and increasing the quality level of your musicians and the ensemble playing. Understanding your audience is very important as you begin the programming process. Here are some of the steps outlined in the book, Beyond the Baton. Steps of programming. You want to categorize the music. And by categorize, I put them into textures and feeling. You know, is this a heroic type of piece? Is this a sad type of piece? Is this a piece that is more textural, like an impressionistic piece? I kind of put them into groupings. You want to research past programming. This is critical to know where the ears of your audience are. If you leap too far beyond their ears, it's like them sitting and listening to a concert or a lecture in Russian. They're not going to hang with you very long if they don't speak Russian, right? So make sure you move them slowly along the path. You want to survey your orchestra, find out what they want to play. They love it if you're listening to them and programming to their strengths. And you want to survey your audience members. You want to assess listening expectations, where the ears are. You want to investigate soloists because your soloist repertoire will often define your programming. You know, particularly in a larger name soloist, they're going to tell you what they want to play, not you telling them. You want to identify important events. I'll always remember the concert I had on Valentine's Day where in programming a year in advance, I forgot that it was going to be Valentine's Day. And I had to do a real quick verbal switch on that. Also had the same problem once with the St. Patrick's Day where I had to do some shifting of programming when I remembered that it was right on St. Patrick's Day and I thought I might need to do something. You want to research new music and diversity, very hot topics right now. And you want to include lesser performed composers and works. I utilize the cornerstone approach to programming, where I have one piece or one concept for each concert. That is what I call my cornerstone. This is an example of looking at 4 concerts. One concert is a major work. Maybe it's a Mahler symphony. The next concert, it's your soloist. Maybe you're inviting Emmanuel Axe. That's your cornerstone that you're going to build around. Maybe then you pick another major work, and then maybe your 4th concert, you're going to go with a theme concert, okay? Then maybe your next cornerstone is another soloist and it's a different instrument. And then my last cornerstone might be another major work. Just an idea of how you look at this in context. You want to look at the shape or trajectory of a concert. So each of these little diagrams up and down are ideas about concert trajectories. Okay, like the one in the middle is 2 pieces, a big piece in the first half, a big piece in the second half. They start loud, they are softer in the middle, and they end loud. So think about that and think about the trajectories of how your concerts blend over the course of your season. And often if I end softly, I do planned encores, okay? Because I personally want to send people out tapping, humming, excited. Types of programming. We have classical concerts, we have theme concerts, we have pops programming, educational programming, semi-stage theatrical concerts and opera concerts. And now we actually have film concerts where a conductor is required to learn how to conduct to click tracks and streamers and time counters. So you need experience in programming of all these different types of concerts. And I do give some, in the book, I give some very concise outlines and timings of how you would go about doing particularly pops concerts and educational concerts. I can't go into all the details now, so I'm just giving you a highlight. Last steps of programming, you want to review your constraints. Budget constraints, are you within the budget parameters? Rehearsal constraints, can the music be done within the rehearsal time you have allocated? Staging constraints, will you fit on the stage? We have that problem. My stage is very small in Allentown. You want to look for balance across the season. Is there something in there for everyone? You know, one person might love Tchaikovsky and another person might love John Adams. You want to make sure you're keeping everybody, that they have at least one thing that they really truly love in your season. And you want to analyze your programming arc over multiple years. This is very important so that you're building your orchestra and your audience and you're thinking in a much larger context. I actually recommend a 5-year planning cycle where the first 2 are pretty detailed and then the next 3 have components that can be moved around depending on funding and budget and availability. I think that's a good way to handle that. So now let's talk about planning cycles. This planning cycle is for the USA, for regional orchestras, because of the way we work with subscription tickets. It does not work as well for, like when I was working with the Sarajevo Philharmonic in Bosnia, they planned about 2 months in advance only because they're state funded and they're not relying upon ticket sales. In the United States, we need to get our brochures out by February or March of the season before the one that's starting. So you need to follow this type of timeline. If you don't do your job, no one else on the staff can do their jobs. The marketing people can't do the brochure until they have all the information. They can't do the budgets until you're able to crunch what is it going to cost. So it's very, very important that you keep to the planning cycles. Working with people. You're going to be working with a lot of different people. And so in the book, I take you through the roles of these people and some job descriptions. Whether you're working with professionals or whether these are volunteers that are helping, this might be a community orchestra, you still need these jobs to be done by someone. And ideally, you don't want them done by you. You want to have other people doing these jobs. Music librarian, personnel manager. If you're doing educational outreach, you will be working with an education director closely and planning programs. Operations manager, if you have any things about the staging you want to specify, you need to be in communication. Guest artist relationships are things you build over the years and get their personal information. You work with them once, you have to go through the manager. After that, you should be able to have an email or a phone number that you can talk to them before it goes to the management, and you can really develop that relationship over time. It will help you with your negotiation of fees tremendously. I just got a thing. Am I supposed to click approve on this? I think I'm going to decline. Okay. Board of trustees. So you're going to work with the board of trustees, and you're going to work with an artistic committee. Working with the orchestra, you're going to work with an orchestra committee. You may or may not be involved in their meetings, depending on the structure. If you're with a union orchestra, you need to be familiar with union policies. I would recommend that you read through collective bargaining agreements as part of your training, even if you're not working with an orchestra that has a CBA. In general, all orchestras, union or not union, try to follow the core standards of the industry, and they are defined, they're defined by these collective bargaining agreements. The IMA is the Integrated Media Agreement, which is about a 64-page document. And this is another thing to be familiar with. This defines all of the media, whether you want to post something nationally or internationally. During COVID, this is critically important. And also during COVID, the EMG, which is the Electronic Media Guarantee, is something you need to know about. Something I just found out about recently, but it's where your musicians can, through their local union, allocate money of their regular pay scale to be put towards electric screening of music on the internet. Okay. Organizing your rehearsal. This is something I do for every concert. I create tempo sheets. I create bowings. Often my bowings are done by the principals, but I always ask for copies so I can check them to see that they work with my musical concept. Important thing about string divises, don't just leave that to the principals. Certain pieces like Copland, I like to do divises front half, back half, because you get a better sense of ensemble. Also Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, I like to do, particularly in the violas and the cello, front half, back half. Once again, you're going to get a better sound in the end. Yeah. And you need to inform people of this in advance, or they're going to be practicing the wrong parts. And you can't change it once the music's already gone out and they're starting to practice. You need to make sure their instructions, like we do a lot of Piazzolla, often it needs an instruction sheet of how some of the notations are performed, or if you have cuts. Rehearsal schedules are very important to have for every single concert and to put those out well in advance. I do mine all in the summer. And risers or stage diagrams. How do you want the orchestra to sit? And then I also usually have reference recordings. Rehearsal techniques. My favorite saying, tell them what you want, don't criticize what they did. If you apply this to everything you do in life, you will be successful. It keeps things in the positive. A few others, there are a lot more in the book, but some things to remind you of: keep music always at the core as you talk to the orchestra. invite the orchestra to play. Do not be a dictator on the podium. The pause. This is one of my favorites. So often people stop and their mouth is going before the orchestra has even stopped playing. And then nobody can hear what's being said. So I always say, stop the orchestra, count to 3 in your mind, and then start to speak. And when you speak, particularly for women, we need to speak loudly and slowly, because the last thing we want is for someone in the trombones to raise their hand and say, where are we starting? You know, because they couldn't hear what you were saying. It just tanks a rehearsal. With intonation, as opposed to saying you're flat, you're sharp, and spending a lot of time arguing about that, I like to have everybody play into the sound of one musician. And depending on what I'm tuning, it may be that a musician has the melody in that phrase and everybody needs to go with them. It may be that they have the tonic and they're grounding the chord. It may be that I want people to listen to a certain musician because they're right now listening to someone else who's playing out of tune. So it's a subtle way to quickly, and what happens is not only does the intonation improve immediately, but the balance improves immediately. So it's just a technique you can use. And then a reminder to be always professional and positive. So let's talk a little bit about fundraising. You need to understand the budget. You need to be fiscally responsible always. It's not that you can't go back and ask for more money or come to the board with a big project, but you have to be sensitive and you have to give them ways of funding that project. You're going to be involved in all types of fundraising. It might be personal calls to people, either by phone, by Zoom now, or lunch meetings. You'll be involved with grants. You may have your name on an appeals letter. You may have to write it, or you may have someone else write it for you and you just kind of fix it to sound like you. And you need to be programming things that inspire funding. So you need to be on top of what is being granted around the country. You want to be able to slant the artistic ideas so that it will fit with grants without compromising what you're doing and without adding new programs. Your job is to be there selling and communicating the vision. And you need to be involved with donor cultivation. A lot of people are afraid of fundraising. I actually love fundraising, and I'll tell you why. I believe that when I talk with a donor that has money, and I'm talking, that has money that they can spend, they often have a dream or a passion. And I am the person that if I can align what we do with their dream or passion, I have the ability to make their dreams come true. What a gift to offer someone that their dreams can come true. And so fundraising is all about investment in people and their trust in you to fulfill the mission of the organization. Public speaking, you're going to end up doing a lot of speeches. I had no idea when I was in school. I never took a speech course. I had no idea how many public speeches I would end up having to do. You're going to do interviews, newspaper, radio, TV. You want to practice. So make sure, particularly with newspaper, anything you say can be printed and can be twisted around. So always be careful how you word things. Often when you've known a reporter a long time, you sort of become very relaxed and talk off the cuff. That may be quoted in a way a little bit different than you originally thought. You don't know, you don't control it. I'm finding that you land up having to write articles, blogs, and often even program notes. So work on your writing skills. I had no idea I was going to have to do those when I was in school. The resource section at the end of the book, as I mentioned before, is one of my favorite sections because it gathers all the information that I had in folders or on scraps of paper. So music publishers, where to find music, particularly pops music, is very hard. It was all little single brochures that were mailed out, websites here and there. I tried to put it in all one space. Conducting competitions. I didn't even know there were conducting competitions when I was in school. No one told me. So I put as many as I could find in the book. Workshops, there are so many more now, but now you can find most of them online. Thematic programming lists. All of us had our thematic programming lists that we had. I talked to a bunch of colleagues, gathered them. So if you're doing a program about love, you can look up love in the back and it gives you a lot of pieces and ideas. If you're doing a program on magic, look up that. If you're doing a program on nature, it will give you pieces, both whole pieces, but also movements of pieces. So when you're programming for youth concerts, you can go right to a movement that fits your theme. Saves a lot of time. I keep my book handy. Audition repertoire. You just got a new job and they say, oh, we have a flute opening. And what do you want on the audition list? And you're like, I don't know. So you look at my book and it gives you the top 10 pieces that are usually asked for on flute audition repertoire. So that when you get out of school, you have the tools. Audition, we talked about encore lists. You know, we all want to do encores. So I just started gathering a list of encores that work really well. There are plenty more you can add to the list. It's just a starting point. Sample conductor contracts that you can use as a model. And then, of course, books for further reading and research, because we all want to continue to learn and grow. If you're interested in improving your conducting technique, I also have a book, Baton Basics, that gives you a series of exercises to fine-tune your ability to convey sound, articulation, and character in your conducting. Even though it has the word basics in it, these exercises, though they can be used for someone starting out, are really designed to be used for conductors of all levels to improve their conducting. And honestly, I try to practice them myself every day as warm-up exercises. And it has made a huge difference in my conducting technique. The better your conducting technique is, the more ability you have to save rehearsal time and to get more music out of your musicians. So I hope that this information was helpful for you to understand the scope of the music director's job with a regional per-service orchestra in the United States. And I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and invite questions from all of you.
Diane.
Yes.
I remember the time when we met was in Slovakia, in Košice.
Yes.
You were just releasing your book, and I got one of the first ones signed for you. It means a lot to me. But one thing that we talked by that time is like, wow, it's so much beyond the Baton that we might be thinking about pursuing the Baton because it's so much. When I teach some conducting students, they get sometimes bored when I see you really want to do this, because music, you need to learn a lot of music, but believe me, that's only the top of iceberg.
Yeah.
And I know you teach a lot, and a lot. You have also a program for you have been having some workshops for women conductors.
Yes.
I would like to ask you if you're still doing that, and if you can talk a little bit about reserving your time just for teaching women conductors.
Yes, thank you. That's great. So I taught, it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago in New York, through the New York Conductors Institute, a conducting workshop for women. And it was really an amazing experience. It was in person, and I think we had 20 to 25 conductors there from all over the world, all different ages and experience levels. And what was so fascinating is in that environment, we were able to have conversations about the field and about issues people had dealt with that could never really be talked about in a workshop that had both men and female in it. So I found it very, very inspiring. And what I love about what you're doing here with the symposium is that I had no idea there were so many, many, many more women out there. I often feel very isolated, and Tony, I'm sure you feel the same way, because
right?
Yeah, we kind of know our circle of women, but it would be so wonderful to have a network that ongoing we could exchange ideas, because we are making such inroads and really changing the world. I count my blessings that I grew up at a time when the field was beginning to open up. I really feel if I'd grown up 10 years, even 10 years 15 years earlier, I would not have had the experiences that I've had today.
Diane, we so appreciate what you're saying, especially around the female collaboration aspect. We do have one question from Laura Seamet. She's asking about your publisher. She would like to know, basically, can your books be shipped to Argentina? And also about other publishers, can they ship to Argentina? What is your experience during the pandemic? So.
I don't know for sure, but I know that you can get my book on Amazon. If you're in the United States, you can go to my website, and I actually sell it at a discount because I can get multiple copies at a discount. But I don't ship to foreign countries because it just costs too much money. If you're interested, though, I can find out what it costs and let you know. But Amazon has the book. Oxford University Press has the book. It's pretty much available through any bookstore. Barnes and Noble, any of those can order the book. Though I think you'll find better pricing online. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Also, I personally was really excited when I was reading through your book around the whole issue of the 3 different kind of larger vision of technique. For example, Max Rudolph, whom I knew personally in Philadelphia. He was so amazing. He took me to the Philadelphia Orchestra and basically taught me a lot about opera because he was so into opera at that time. And I was just beginning around that. That was so exciting. And then Ilya Musin, who's one of the most famous pedagogues in Russia, who has brought forth some of the best conductors on the planet from, that are Eastern European. Oh my gosh, he was amazing. And then the Hideo Saito technique. I was just curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that, because I think those 3 techniques are fascinating and they make a huge difference culturally for others. So
yeah. So in the United States, I think we tend to grow up learning more the Max Rudolph technique, which the point of the beat happens at the end of the beat, and it's very much often ictus based. And in fact, I have to actually train the ictus out of a lot of conductors because they're using it for everything. So what happened is when I was younger in my career, I studied in Russia and learned about the Musin technique. The Musin technique is different in that it's based upon the feeling of picking up sound and holding sound in your hands. And so when I teach this, and in the book, I recommend using a lot of props to really identify what does this whatever you're picking up, a Coke can, what does that feel like? What is the weight, and what would be the sound that weight might result in the orchestra? So that's all about the energy inside the beats, not about beats. And then the Saito technique is really based upon the pendulum swing. And so in the pendulum swing, like hitting a tennis ball, you swing and the stroke hits in the middle of the beat, not at the end of the beat. So it's a totally different type of technique. And so it's understanding what technique to use when for what type of sound. So if you're trying to get an accelerando and you are using more of the Max Rudolph technique and you're using an ictus beat, you will never be able to get an accelerando because you cannot control speed after an ictus. This is free. And you can only control the impact. So the orchestra can't anticipate where you're going. They'll just get really frustrated. But if you shift to a pendulum swing, the pendulum swing can be increased and you stay with the stroke, and that can allow you to do an accelerando without having it bump. So early on, I was very confused because one teacher would say, do this, and another teacher would say, do this. And I realized that conducting technique had not been systematized. And so I would drop what I'd learned before and then shift to this. And then finally, I realized that everything is correct, but you just have to know how to use it and when to use it. So that's what I try to do in the Baton Basics book, is introduce you to these different types of conducting technique and point you in the direction of how to utilize them.
Yes. I was so impressed about this because honestly, there, and what I liked about your book is that you actually open all of them up, because really the truth is every young conductor needs to know all of these techniques in every possible way. I know in Europe, I've had issues sometimes with the conducting ahead of the beat, waiting for them, and especially in a slow movement, that's like 20 times harder.
Yeah, shift to that pendulum and you can move them right along. And
Exactly.
know that you are always going to be ahead. So the Russian technique and the pendulum stroke technique are really based upon end one, and you're always, the end is always the lead.
Exactly.
And so you have to change the way you're thinking.
Yes.
A lot of conductors, they see a forte and they slam down on that beat of forte, not
Yeah.
understanding that the forte gesture must be shown on the end of the prep.
Exactly.
And then the coming down actually doesn't matter. By then the brass people have already released the sound and all you're doing is choking their sound.
Exactly.
So it's
So
big
fast.
prep and then release the sound.
Yes, yes. This is so key because, and I see this personally from an Eastern European viewpoint to here in America, the biggest difference when you mentioned Ilya Musin too about sound and painting the sound, this reminds me a little bit about violin playing, almost like, since both you and I are violinists, about being into the sounding point. It's almost like we're into the sounding point with our arms, our hand is in the sounding point.
Yes. Yeah.
And then when we grab that sound and we keep going and we don't let it go the whole time, which is sometimes a bit exhausting, but fantastic musically. Yeah. I think the best music making is from this personally. And I've been bringing that back to America a lot more with all my orchestras here, because I after living in Bulgaria for 2 years, I really saw a huge difference in what could happen musically with that Ilya Musin technique. And so I just love that you went into that more into your book, and both books actually. And I was curious from your perspective in America, how do you do that? How do you bring that with your orchestras as well?
Yeah, so orchestras, they will innately follow whatever you do. And you have to, as you work and you're experimenting with different types. So as I'm practicing, I always practice silently, okay? I practice silently. You know, the other thing I have to always cure people of is, you know, they're going ba, 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 or singing as they're playing. And you should be able to hear the music that you, in your head, but I try to actually hear the music as my hand is showing the music, okay? So then when I'm in front of the orchestra, I'm already hearing what I think is going to sound or what I want it to sound like. And then I have to subtly adjust my gestures when I don't get the sound I want, because they will respond to absolutely everything I do. And so if I'm not getting the sound I want, I need to change something in my technique. And what's so great is once you get your technique down, literally you can be in a concert and the trombones are playing too short, and all I have to do is like this, and they will immediately within a beat start playing long, because they know that I'm going to give them just what they need and I'm not going to get out of their way. So a lot of people overconduct. You know, the other thing I'm trying to always cure people of is they want to conduct every beat. And so often, you know, if it's in 4 and you start them, if it's a good orchestra, and even if it's a young orchestra, they're gonna play without you. So what can you bring that makes a difference? An emotional difference, an articulation difference. You don't need to beat time whatsoever in most repertoire, but if you are going to be a conductor and you want them to actually watch you, if you don't give them anything, they will simply stop watching. But if you are giving them lengths, articulation, and so I don't teach at all with like conducting diagrams from the beginning like a lot of people do. I teach with every beat might be different. It will be in a basic 4 shape, or 3 shape, but every beat will be different depending on the articulation of that note. Now, if it's a repeated passage, maybe there'll be a whole passage that's the same. And I don't always, you know, certain pieces like Firebird, I need to go 1 on the opening. I need to go over here so they can see. But other pieces like a Mendelssohn, I want to actually be very vertical. I don't want to go 1, 2, 3, because this gesture is different than this gesture. I would go 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything would become horizontal. for something with fast 16th notes. So understanding how to shift your technique to fit the music. That's what I'm all about.
This is fantastic, Diane, because so many young conductors have this idea of like, especially when you're starting out, right, that it has to be a certain way, like into kind of tiny boxes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're pulling us out of the boxes, which is so great. But of course, you have to have the technique to go out of the boxes and fly. But what I was also curious about, which is fascinating to me on the European side versus the American side, is in Europe, you know, they're wanting exactly what you said before. They're wanting kind of the expression, and they're not so into the beating and clicking in the way that Americans are. I mean, Americans really want, like, where is one, where is two, where is three? They want that a lot. So those two different, like, kind of cultures, right, inside orchestras are fascinating to me. I feel like when I'm in America, I'm trying to get them into the large vision out of that technique thing. And then when I'm in Europe, I get to play emotionally in a very big way, which is so fantastic. So I'm just curious how you deal with that as well, because that's just,
I think it comes from once again the training, and we have a very strong band culture in the United States, and band conducting by necessity. I remember I was coaching once a young conductor who was just starting out, and she had been a drum major. So when you think of a drum major in a football field, and all they really just want to see this very, very large gesture, because you're trying to keep people together over a huge field, is very different type of technique than the subtleties of an orchestra or even of a chorus. So it's just something that I think over time, the better the training is for our conductors, the better our ensembles will be. And that's really why I wrote the second book, the technique book, because I was teaching and I realized that people didn't have what I call vocabulary of gestures. Their vocabulary was limited to see, spot, runs fast. That's sort of children's book writing in the United States. So I had to give them a vocabulary. And I also, in reading a lot of other conducting books, realized how confusing they were. And so my Baton Basics is based upon every gesture in there is a gesture that you already know how to do and you already do correctly, naturally, so that you can analyze what muscles are naturally being utilized and then apply that to your conducting technique. And then once you develop away from the podium and away from your music technique, like a ballerina trains their body and trains the muscles. Once you train your muscles, we've done this for years, that we can move so slowly across here, but we couldn't do that at the very beginning when we tried, right? The types of technique we take for granted after, years of conducting need to be trained in. And so I really advocate the training of the muscles and developing technique separately from the music, and then analyzing how you're going to apply that technique.
Wonderful.
So some people think, oh, this is choreography. It's not choreography. It's as if a violinist, they see a passage for up bow staccato. They go, oh, if I want this sound, I must do this technique. The same correlates.
So sorry for disturb, but
we're out of time.
We should start another conference now. And I'm so sorry, because so interesting what you're saying. Maybe we can program another conference, another day for continue, if you can.
Sure.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, we can talk about conducting technique. I can talk for hours about it.
Wonderful. Let's see in which day we do this. Thank you very, very much, dear Diane. And I'm so sorry. I invite you to see the other conference with Deborah Waldman, but won't be in English. I'm sorry. But and Antonia, thank you very much. I will invite you to close this conference to start the other. And we see Diane then another day in this symposium.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ligia, who has been the vision of all of this with her team. We're so grateful to her. And Diane, that was amazing. We're getting lots of great comments in the chat. they're mostly just very excited. So, but perhaps on the next one, we can go even deeper into all these things that you've been talking about. So thank you so very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
I think I close and I start again. Okay. Bye bye. See you.